Britten Variations. Oh my goodness! So much has happened. And pretty much immediately after I filmed, things started happening. And the first thing that happened was this. I've torn up the first movement entirely. It's gone. It's just gone. And indeed the whole idea of 3 movements is gone. And now it's just 1 movement, which is mostly what was the second movement, because Amy and I both decided we were far more interested in that material than in anything else that was going on, basically. Yeah. So that was a really big step and a huge relief, and it seems to have unblocked the whole thing, which is really, really, really good. I'm so sick of this piece being stuck. The other big thing that's happened is that Amy said, well, we've got this strumming, why don't I just turn the cello on its side and play it like a guitar? So we're doing that, and we've thrown the bow out the window, metaphorically speaking, and now everything is done with plectrum or fingers. We've got a whole lot of different sounds we've been playing around with. Yeah, we've got the strumming with the plectrum happening. We've got what I'm calling a sideways tremolo. It's not a technique that Amy's ever come across before. I can't find any reference to it, so I've had to actually make up a symbol for the score, which is kind of stressful and frustrating. And it means we're going to have to sort of really talk carefully about how we describe this in a key in the score so that people can actually understand what it is. But basically, whereas with a normal tremolo you go across the string, this one goes along the string. And so you're playing with the plectrum and basically scratching off the rosin that accumulates on the string from when you play with the bow. Which is a really intriguing sound. I'm really enjoying it, and then it actually transitions really nicely into the strumming that we already had, which is much easier for Amy with the cello on its side than it is playing it the normal way. And we've got other sounds like drumming on the tailpiece, percussive slaps, we can sort of stroke the wood, harmonics are working really well both with the plectrum and the fingers, and yeah, we're just trying all sorts of sounds and seeing where we end up with. What we have lost, of course, by getting rid of the bow is sustained sounds. So we've been messing about with things like pulling the plectrum up the string, which does make the sound a bit longer, but it's still quite short. And then Amy mentioned that she has an E-bow. And I went, ooh, because yeah, that just sounded like so much fun. And she hadn't actually used it before, so poor girl, I've made her spend some time to actually find the E-bow and read the manual and get some new batteries for it, and then have a go at sort of seeing how it works on the cello. The nice bit of news is that the sound is gorgeous. I absolutely love the sounds it makes. And I kind of really want to do something with them, but it's quite unstable, and it only works on the A string on her cello, and it's so quiet that pretty much the amp needs to be cranked up to 11 to get any sound out of it at all, which is problematic in terms of the rest of the piece, which is also amplified and is going to need the volume to be much, much lower. So we've had to ditch that for now, but I'm really interested in doing something with it. I'm also thinking I might try and borrow one and see what happens on the viola, because the strings are much lighter on the viola, and I think we might get a much better result. It might open up possibilities for what I'm doing with that. So I'm quite excited about that now. It'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. So we've been looking at singing and playing as well, which sounds really nice. I'm a little hesitant about it, and I've kind of mentally shelved it a bit because Amy is reluctant to have her voice amplified, but I'm thinking that the balance then between unamplified voice and amplified cello might not be so great. But we're going to do some tests and just see how that comes out. She says she's done it before with the voice unamplified and the cello amplified in different pieces, and it's been fine. So yeah, I'm reserving judgment. I'd like to hear it, but I think I'm probably, yeah, it's at the back of the mind, really. I don't want to get too emotionally attached to it and then discover that I'm disappointed in the balance and that I'm not certain it's going to be great. So with the whole one movement thing, you might recall many moons ago, I can't remember when I first started talking about the coda, that I had this idea for an introduction that would balance it, and so that each of them it'd be like the start of the piece and the end of the piece, just really stretched out and with the tone colour changed, and that these would sort of bookend the rest of the piece. So that's back. Now that we've got rid of the first movement, it's not duplicating material, and so the first few notes of the piece are the first few notes of the Britten stretched out, and we're using the sideways tremolo in both those areas, which has quite a different feel, because at the start of the piece it's, there's going to be much more rosin on the strings from normal playing of the cello, and then as that technique progresses, it scrapes all the rosin off, and so by the end of the piece it's got quite a different feel for the same technique. I've been revisiting the tape part too, which I haven't looked at in quite a while, and what I've ended up doing is combining the very first work that I did on the tape part, which was to take one of the verbal diary entries about the piece and just stretch it. And so now I've combined that with the second one, which is based on the margin annotations from writing I've done about the piece, mostly in Australia, which I then did close mic'd recordings of, and I've layered those up. And so I've layered the layered material over the stretched material, which is it's sort of softening the edges of it, which I think is quite nice.
Held longevity, harmony, interrupted, direction, resonance, definition, interruption, layers, horizontal parts, Britten, vertical, resonance, definition.
I'm thinking of this more as textural content, and I've been listening to a lot of Apagis recently and sort of thinking about one of the things I really enjoy about a lot of his vocal work is that because my French is super dodgy, I really enjoy this aspect of sort of French-shaped sound that implies meaning that I don't actually understand, and then you get a moment where it's like, oh, I understood that word or that phrase. It just sort of comes out of the mass of it and then goes back in, and so you've got the shape of the language, but the meaning isn't there because of my own linguistic deficiencies. But sort of trying to find a way to maybe draw on that impression by messing with the sounds that I have through layering or stretching out or whatever, sort of have this sort of coming and going of meaning that relates to the sort of the issues that are at work in the piece. There are logistical things to do with the tape part now which I wasn't aware of before, and I had been thinking when I first went back to the tape part and started combining all this, we can have this sort of like dense texture at the start, and then it can cut off quite suddenly here, and then it can come back in here. And then I discovered that in order to achieve that with like separate audio files and get it all sort of nicely synchronized, Amy actually has to manipulate her foot pedal with her toes. So she has to actually get a toe in there to change the track, and then use the foot pedal to start it and stop it and change the track with a toe. And it just all sounded incredibly messy. I've got 100% confidence that she'd manage it and she'd find a way to do it. But it's also not, it doesn't really gel with the way I tend to work. And the more I thought about it, the more it came back to something that actually kept recurring throughout all that time in Australia when I was writing and drawing in particular about this piece. It was this idea of simultaneity, not synchronicity. So instead of having things that must line up, that you would have two things going on at the same time, kind of drifting in and out of sync, and to not have those sort of moments of match-up be scored. I think that interests me more, that it's a more fluid approach, which does work better actually with the technological limitation, to design the tape part and indeed the structure of the whole piece so that you can just start it here and it carries on until you stop it here. It does mean a change to how I'm approaching the structure. I need to ensure that those kind of transitions where there's going to be a significant change in the tape part should be quite loose and sort of maybe a bit more organic, rather than sort of a hard cut from one type of texture to another type of texture. So yeah, still working on that and hoping to get a bit more done on that this week before we meet up on Monday. So going back to that idea of text that is or is not comprehensible, and sort of ideas of stretching things or textual changes and sort of meaning coming and going, but all of it based in text. This also relates to something I've been thinking about for a few weeks now, about how to use basically that notebook text that I've used in the Britten possibly as a way to extend what I do with my voice. After I did Dot Drip Line Line 8918 Edge, I've found that every time I've tried to do vocal stuff, it just seems like the same thing over and over again, and I find it quite dull, and I suspect an audience might too. It's like, oh, here she goes again with the burbling and the strange sounds. And I really wanted to find a way to stretch what I'm doing vocally, and I felt that text might be a way into that. I'm not that concerned about comprehensibility, but using the sounds of words and sound of language to find new sounds and new ways of using my voice that then may allow meaning to come and go. Yeah, and pitch as well. The sorts of sounds I was making for Edge, there's not a lot of pitch in there. I have used pitch in the performance of that. I mean, most notably in Mountview, where somehow I ended up with this sort of giant sung note in the middle of it, which was quite strange. I'd not done that before. But I quite liked it too, and I felt it might be quite nice to play a bit more with pitch and with language and sort of see where that goes. So I pulled out the Zoom recorder and just did some improvising, some of which was quite naff, so it was good to be alone in the house. And I actually haven't listened to it yet, but obviously I will when I edit this, so I don't actually know if any of it's any good, but it felt like it was getting somewhere by the end. No, then, no, then, no, then. Okay, some of these I want to be contrasting the mouth shape. So that one was, the now was quite tall and vertical as a mouth shape, and the then quite broadened, well, Australian really. That contrast's quite nice as well as the contrast in register. No, then, no, then, no, no. So yeah, this might turn into something, it might not. I'm kind of hoping I can pull something together based around this to try out. And next week we've got a Bastards workshop all week, where we're just going to be sort of playing around with some new pieces and some ideas and seeing where that goes to. Anyway, that's about it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye.